What's up guys, welcome to the RA Visuals YouTube channel. So today we're going to go ahead and get back into the roots of this channel, and we're going to go ahead and build a budget PC using some new and used hardware that I found off various markets, and honestly, just some stuff that I've had laying around for a long time. But I'm going into this with a couple of main questions based on the hardware that I'll be using. First, are AMD FX processors still worth picking up for a budget build if you can find a screaming deal on them like I did? And can they even drive like any kind of games really with the proper graphics card? Now we're gonna go ahead and build this AMD FX PC real quick and find out, but first, a word from our sponsor.
Are you tired of that annoying Windows activation watermark on your desktop? VIP URCD Key has you covered with fully licensed codes to activate your favorite games and software. Purchasing your key is super easy. All you have to do is click on the item that you want, click buy to add it to your cart. Once in your cart, you can now enter my promo code RAV20. After adding the promo code, you'll see your savings pop up, and you can then purchase your product with your chosen payment method. You'll now have a fully licensed version of Windows 10 with no watermark. Check the links in the description to start saving now.
Alright, let's get started with building this budget rig. As always, any parts that I use in this, I'm going to be linking for you guys in the description in case you guys wanted to pick up some of this stuff to build your own budget computer. So at the heart of this build, we're going to be using the AMD FX-6300 processor that I found on Facebook Marketplace, bundled with a motherboard and 16 gigs of DDR3 RAM for only 90 bucks, I think like last year or something like that. Honestly guys, even at this price, I almost did not do this deal because I know how old these FX processors are getting these days, so I'm curious to see if they're even worth picking up anymore, as this processor itself was released all the way back in 2012. Either way, this processor has 6 cores and 6 threads, but at the time, it really did not possess the single core performance that a similar like Intel processor had on the same line. So it really never made them the choice for gaming, but rather more of an affordable option. In fact, if you take a look at some numbers, Intel's Core i7-950, which launched back in 2009, a whole 3 years earlier, was actually still a faster option. So yeah, I'm not really expecting too much from this CPU anymore. Like I said, the combo I picked came with 16 gigs of Corsair Vengeance RAM, and it's running at 1600 megahertz, so it's pretty standard for a build of this time. In fact, I had stuff like this in my build back then as well, so it should be enough to run some modern games or even some, little older games. The CPU, motherboard, and RAM combo came with this super old CPU cooler. Looks really interesting, but honestly, I didn't really want to use it, so we went ahead and trashed that and got a nice cheap cooler from Amazon, and then it actually installed very, very easily, and it actually looks pretty cool as well. Now we're gonna go ahead and throw this combo in a cheap case from Montech. I have no idea who these guys are, but I found it on Newegg for like 45 bucks, and it comes with 3 RGB fans that are pre-installed. And now, okay, don't get me wrong, it's a very budget case, and the fans are just the general rainbow RGB color, so you can't even change it, and they're actually Molex powered. Yuck. But nonetheless, I think this case will get the job done. And speaking of getting the job done, for storage, I decided to use a trusty ADATA SU630 SSD because I've used them a million times in budget builds. They're fast, they're cheap, and they just get the job done for the correct price. And now I also didn't have a PSU for this build, so I picked up a very cheap 650 watt power supply from Amazon that had really good reviews. I've actually never tried this brand before, but at the price of $35 for a 650 watt, I really couldn't pass it up at the time, so I decided to grab it. Finally, I'm sure you're all wondering what GPU we're going to be throwing in this build now. And after checking out a few things on userbenchmark.com like I always do, it looks like the most commonly used GPU with the FX-6300 is the GTX 1050 Ti, and it just so happens that I had one here in the studio, so we can go ahead and pair those two together and see how they actually perform here in 2022. Now it also looks like the RX 580 and GTX 1060 were very common GPUs to use with this setup, so I decided why not try my RX 570 4 gig that I have laying around to try to get somewhere in the middle of the 1050 Ti and those other 2 cards that I just mentioned in terms of performance. So we're gonna go ahead and start this testing off by testing the FX-6300 with a GTX 1050 Ti. So let's go ahead and see what numbers we can get. All right guys, so getting into our first test, we're gonna be testing Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And now I always test this one still because this is a great CPU intensive type benchmark, and it's, you know, a built-in benchmark, so I don't gotta like play the game or anything like that. I can just kind of let it run and do its thing, and it gives us some nice data to go off of. So I'm gonna start it with this real quick. All right, now as we're getting into the benchmark here, guys, I mean, at lowest settings, you're actually, I mean, this first scene, we're getting over 60 frames per second, so that's actually not bad. I think maybe we could have gone with maybe low or even medium or something like that, but as you can see, it's gonna start tanking here. What I really wanna see after this scene, I wanna see like the last one where a lot of things are on screen. That one usually is the one that gets most systems and stuff like that. But right now, you can already see, actually, the 6300 is not fully taxed at 100% yet. So that's a good sign for our testing. Let's go ahead and see what it does throughout the entire thing. We're getting into the 30s now right here. The 6300 actually is not fully at 100%, but it is in the 90s, 95, 96, 97, 98. And then it actually, the 1050 Ti isn't fully being utilized. So that leads me to believe we are a bit CPU bound here. And that is why even on the lowest settings, we're still only able to muster about 40 something FPS in this part of it right here. So again, this is what I really wanted to see, because this is usually an indication of like what the real FPS would be when a lot of stuff's happening. So let's go ahead and see what our actual numbers are here when it comes up. All right, so taking a look at our actual bench numbers from the benchmark itself, it looks like we got an average FPS of 54. So at the lowest settings, I mean, guys, like I said, not exactly the best thing you could ever wish for, but hey, pretty close to 60, but not exactly there. But that's, again, why I put it at the lowest settings. I wanted to give us even a chance. So yeah, I think it did okay, but yeah, I mean, it can still play this game. And again, this is a very CPU intensive game and a very graphically intensive game, so I think it did all right. But anyway, let's move on to our next game. Okay guys, so the next game we're gonna try is a CSGO, and now the reason I do this one is because this is an esports title. This is actually a game that came out around when this processor came out, so I guess it's kind of fair. So as I see right now, so as playing, it looks like we're going anywhere from 110 to 150, something like that, just depending on what's going on. Let's get into a fight. Okay, got him. That was a nice little headshot there, nice. Ooh, hello, one tap. Doing really good this time. But yeah, it looks like, okay, we won, but that was a quick little test. But guys, it looks like it plays this game just fine, I think. So we're getting anywhere from like 120, 130, 140. Guy was trying to be cheeky. But yeah, I think that's a good solid conclusion for this game. Maybe we move on to our next one. Okay guys, so getting into our next game, we're gonna go ahead and be testing Doom Eternal, 1920 by 1080, and we're gonna be using just medium settings, kind of just like we did with CSGO. So the reason I wanted to test this game is because this game is very well optimized. I test this pretty much every time I test computers, because a lot of computers can run this very smooth, and it's a great mix of a CPU and GPU bound game. It's more GPU bound for sure, but I want to see how this combo can do in this game. So let's go ahead and hop into our usual, you know, first level benchmark and see what we can get. And tear until it is done. The 6300 is not even being as taxed as much in this one, so that's a good sign. We're not CPU bound in this game, we're GPU bound here. So when we put the 570 in here, this will definitely run a lot better. So we're getting 59, 58, 56. I mean, I'm trying to make as many explosions as possible so we can actually see how, when you're up and close and personal and stuff like that. I mean, for the most part, you guys, oh, it just hit 70. For the most part, this is actually pretty freaking smooth, you guys. I'm actually kind of surprised. It's not too bad. So, I mean, man, this might actually indicate that it's a little bit worth it to do this. I mean, we're not hitting like 100 FPS or anything, but I mean, it's not terrible either. All right, so now that we've tested the 1050 Ti, let's go ahead and switch that thing out with the RX 574 gig and see if there's much performance difference, or if we're simply too CPU bottlenecked already for the powerful card to even matter. Okay guys, back here on CSGO, and we can definitely see that we're still getting, you know, relatively good frame rates and stuff like that, but it's doing something that it wasn't doing before, and that is it's kind of dipping below to the 90s, and it wasn't doing this before. And I think the reason why is because we are getting seriously CPU limited here, and I think this is actually showing when the 6300 is actually not helping at all in this game, and it's just basically using our our GPU, but it's not getting much help from the CPU, and that's why we're seeing that frame dip that we didn't see with the 1050 Ti. I think it was a better pairing with the 1050 Ti for this game, but because we're using a stronger GPU, we almost kind of need a stronger CPU for this one. So yeah, either way, it's still playable, but this is when it's showing where, like, you know, an i5 or something from this era would have been a little bit better for CSGO. Let's go with the next game. Okay guys, and now we're gonna take a look at Rise of the Tomb Raider again. Same settings, everything like that, at 1920 by 1080, lowest settings. I don't wanna change anything, I just wanna see the change in FPS. Let's go ahead and check the benchmark and see what we get this time. All right guys, so getting into the benchmark this time, we can definitely see we're already getting a bit of an improvement in FPS, but I mean, it's not like super substantial, it doesn't look like, because I think it's because of our CPU once again. We're CPU limited. Guys, one thing I do wanna point out though about this whole thing is that CPU cooler that I bought that was like 25 bucks, it keeps this CPU super cold. Like, it is usually around like 38 degrees Celsius is the highest I've seen it get through any benchmark. So that's pretty freaking cool. Okay guys, so looking at our results here, there was not very much of an improvement at all. And that is simply because this game is super CPU bound and we didn't change our CPU obviously. So as you guys saw, there were points when it literally was not even utilizing the RX 570 at all. It was just trying to use its CPU to do all of its, you know, all the tasks and everything. So this is one of those instances where actually upgrading your CPU rather than your GPU would yield you better performance in a certain game like this. All right guys, so hopping right back into Doom Eternal, we're gonna go ahead and run it again, 1920 by 1080 at medium settings, just like last time. We're gonna hop into the exact same spot, and we're gonna see what kind of change we got in this game, because we already know this game is a lot more affected by the GPU, not so much by the CPU. So let's see what happens. All right, so hopping back in, I'm already seeing quite the improvement here. So again, this is one of those times when I say it depends on the game sometimes, but as you can see, like, we're hitting 80, 90 FPS. We were not hitting that last time at all. If you guys remember, we were hitting something like around 60 at this point, maybe 50 and 60. So this game is not really determined so much by the CPU, obviously. It definitely has a lot more to do about the GPU. So looks like in this game, specifically, this combo is not bad at all at 1080p medium settings, because we are getting, you know, 70, 80, 90 up to 100 FPS I just saw. And even when the explosions are happening, we're blowing stuff up on screen and we're, you know, ripping and tearing, of course, like you're supposed to do in Doom. It's yeah, it's actually a really good play experience. Super smooth, nothing wrong with it. I'm having a really good time. Can't notice any stutters or nothing like that. I'm loving it. And again, it looks like, as you can see with the performance numbers, yes, the CPU is still trying. It's up in the, you know, 95 percentile right there. But as you can see, the RX 570 is pinned at 100% the entire time, because it is doing the max amount of work rather than the CPU doing the max amount of work. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm honestly gonna leave it here, guys. I'm not even gonna test any more games, because you guys can already see what's going on with these benchmark numbers as far as this FX processor goes. If you have a really crazy CPU bound game, some of these may not be the best processors to grab, especially this one. But if you're playing games that more rely on a GPU, then it may not be the worst idea. You may just have trouble playing other certain games. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. So to conclude all of this, you guys, you can clearly see by my testing that if you're gonna be building a budget rig using parts from this era, say like the DDR3 era, I'd call it, yeah, you can get by using something like this, and it actually works for some games, like especially like, you know, CSGO and like other esports games. But honestly, you'd definitely be better off by using something from Intel in this era, especially something like an Intel i5, even just like a 3470, because at this time, that handedly beat out this processor. And in fact, this processor is more like something like an i3 from that era. So yeah, it makes me think back to when I made my first PC. I actually used an AMD processor for my first PC, and the second iteration of it too. It makes me think back and go, oh, I should have been using an i5 that entire time. So, oops. But anyway, I want to know your guys' thoughts on this. Would you guys consider picking up some of this hardware to put together a budget rig, especially like an esports rig? You know, let me know in the comments below, and let's start a conversation about it. And as always, don't forget to like the video if you found this stuff interesting. And if you guys like this computer content, you want to see more stuff like this, make sure you guys go ahead and get subscribed with those notifications on. That way you guys will always know when my next video will be going live. Thank you for watching the video, you guys. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.